Welcome to VoxConversations. I'm your host, Matt Popovitz. Thank you for tuning in for what's going to be a fantastic chat with April Tam Smith. Now, if you're not familiar with VoxCon, we exist for one purpose, and that's to encourage communicators and leaders to unlock their creativity so that they can thrive in their calling. And today's guest at this VoxConversation is a fantastic example of just that. I want to welcome April Tam Smith to our Vox Conversation. April, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
We're so glad to have you with us. April is the founder of something called PS Kitchen. And if you're not familiar with April's work or with PS Kitchen, take a look at this.
Hi, my name is April Tam Smith. I'm the co-founder of PS Kitchen. This is an oasis where you come in and you love the food, you love the environment, but you realize, PS, we donate 100% of our profits. PS, we employ those who need a second chance. And PS, the food is 100% plant-based, so it's better for the environment and better for our consumers. Nobody wakes up one day and just say, let me start a restaurant that gives away 100% of its profit. Usually people would say starting a restaurant, it's hard enough as is. But I think my life was really changed about 10 years ago when I went on my first trip to an orphanage in South Africa where we served children that were HIV positive. And shortly after, started getting really involved in a project that creates jobs in Haiti. I started to just really get this mission and excitement about what if I spend the rest of my life doing this? What if I continue to, yes, work on Wall Street, but take a lot of what I have for various missions and passions that I'm really excited about. In terms of job creation, we have now offered over 55 jobs to those who might need a second chance. We've now started 3 different schools in Goma area in Congo. PS Kindness, PS Grace, and PS Justice. We have also been able to provide numerous cancer screening through an organization called Share Hope in Haiti. Both for my faith as well as being an immigrant kid, I think it's easy for me to see that everything that I have is really not from me, you know? So if it's either from my family, or if it's from God, or if it's from the simple chance that I got to move to the US when others cannot, then it just makes sense for me to share and give it all back. If more businesses can maybe take any one of our concepts, whether it be more plant-based option, maybe employing more people who need a second chance, maybe donating some percentage of their profit. We're a brand that would love for people to steal as many ideas as possible. We want to be generous with all of our PSs as well. What I've loved is it has ignited so many conversations, whether it be people who actually come and want to donate to our nonprofits, or simply saying, you know, I've always wanted to start X, Y, and Z, and because I saw that you took this crazy leap of faith, I feel less crazy, and now I can actually maybe try this out as well. I think being the first one to be crazy has really allowed the freedom for other people in my world to also think in a more crazy way that is better for the world kind of crazy.
So April, tell us more about how PS Kitchen got started and the passion and the mission that is behind it.
Yeah. Well, like I said in the video, no one really wakes up one day and just decide, let me start a nonprofit restaurant. Sometimes it's hard to capture in a small clip like this the 10 years that really led up to it. And I think I take a lot of comfort in that because when young people or, you know, whoever come up to me and ask like, I always want to give back, but how do I get to this point, X, Y, Z? And I always say, like, Mother Teresa says, when you can't feed 100, just feed one. And it was me, you know, being a college kid and going to serve as a volunteer at the community center for underprivileged children that are 5 and 6, then going to the Bronx when I was right out of college, working on Wall Street and mentoring a young woman who's now an adult, graduated college, first person to graduate from college in her family and have a full-time job. That's what slowly led to South Africa, Haiti, and then after a lot of trips to Haiti, seeing that there has to be a more sustainable way for me to keep doing what I'm doing, what I'm passionate about. And I think one of the big trigger for me was knowing the idea of economic orphans and seeing I spend a lot of time in orphanages, and I love spending time with the kids. And of course, there are definitely children out there who don't have parents, but there are also way too many kids out there who might still have one or maybe even both parents that have been given up because their family thinks that they would have a better life or better future economically because they're at an orphanage. And I think that was what really led me to decide what work can I do in Haiti that would solve for some of that, which led to being really involved in the social business in Haiti that you just heard about at Share Hope. But also, what can I do here in New York that does the same thing? We donate all the profits, yes, but another part that I think is really important is the fact that we can employ people and allow them to provide for their own families.
That's incredible. You know, here at VoxCon, we talk a lot about creativity. And so my question to follow up with you is, what aspect of leading PS Kitchen and all of the PS endeavors that you now have requires the most creativity from you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, even just the concept itself I've always thought of myself as someone who's not very creative at all. I always, I would do well in math and I love science, but I literally always struggle with arts and music and can't paint for the life of me. So I've never thought of myself in the creative realm until somebody pointed out the fact of how much I love thinking about creative ways to give. And I think starting PS Kitchen was one example of that, thinking about how I could have continued to donate financially with a full-time job, to nonprofits I care about, and maybe I can help by writing checks and volunteering. And I think that's really important. But I also wanted to see what more can I do and how can I be really creative about solving some of the more systemic problems that I saw. And I think as a volunteer for a few of these organizations, somebody who had sat through many meals with survivors of trafficking in their safe home, or someone who has volunteered for over 5 years now for people who have come home from prison, or really mentoring them even while they're still in prison, I really got this sense that it's the same thing, same conversation, whether I'm talking to somebody from those two populations or when I'm talking to a mom in Haiti. They all just say the same thing. It's like, I just want a job. I want to be able to provide for myself. I want that dignity to be able to do that. And that's when it really came down to, well, what thing can I start that would solve all of those problems? Dr. Muhammad Yunus, who has now become actually a mentor and a friend who's been to PS a few times, he said, when you see a problem, create a business to solve it. Yeah. And I think I really saw, I want to start something that really help these organizations sustainably finance themselves, get people excited. It's really not so much even the profit, it's taking that leap of faith and allowing people, like I said in the video, to come alongside with us and donate to these nonprofits we're passionate about, because they've seen we've taken a leap of faith, they want to join us. And then secondly, it's really employing the people who might need that second chance to hit both of those things. And lastly, of course, is the environmental aspect. Like, I want to start a plant-based restaurant and to inspire more plant-based eating. So really trying to be greedy in a good sense of how many impact can we possibly squeeze into one tiny restaurant in Times Square. And hence I named it PS. It's just all the layers we can try to squeeze in there.
Well, so often we think about creativity in terms of art, understandably so. But I love what you just said, is that problem solving is its own form of creative expression. And that's a key part of leadership. I mean, a great leader is assessing problems and creating solutions. And that takes a lot of innovation and a lot of creativity, constant innovation and creativity. And especially with the example of PS Kitchen and all the other PS endeavors, you have set out to address some really significant issues and found some really creative solutions to those.
Thank you.
Another example of that is the fact that we, of course, have recently faced a global pandemic. and it has affected the restaurant industry. And I'm also certain that it's affected all of your other endeavors. And I'm going to guess that it's required a lot of creativity from you to figure out how to pivot, how to move, how to address that problem that the pandemic has presented you as a leader. So talk to me about the pivot you've had to make in your leadership.
No, absolutely. I would always remember March 15th with my day job. It was really challenging, a lot of stress, a lot of volatility. And with PS Kitchen, we really realized at that point, the mayor hasn't said everybody has to close. But I remember hearing about a large party that came in. And even though normally you get excited about that, all I could do was worried about the impact. All I could do was worried about, oh no, like, were they sitting too close? Like, what should we have even let them in, even though we were still open? And that's when I knew that we're so committed to job creation. But right now, what we can do, the best ROI we can give to society in early to mid-March was just to close. We decided to do that. And then shortly after, that's when it ended up being mandatory anyway. But I remember that day just being really torn of, now how do we help? And thankfully, I've been really touched by just the generosity of many, many people. A few days later, I got a call from a colleague. And actually, sadly, around that time, my mom also had a stroke. So just pretty difficult timing on a lot of levels and trying to keep all the balls up in the air. She had just gotten a liver transplant 2 months prior, and now to get a stroke. It was not a really good time to send her to the ER, as you can imagine. And all of these things happened really on the same day, March 15th. And I can't believe it. 2 days later, I got a call from a colleague who doesn't even know about, I thought, like all of that's happening. But somehow they heard about my mom and they could walk by PS Kitchen and know what's happening. And they just simply said, hey, we want to help. Like, we know that you're in this and we know you've been pretty radical yourself. Like, we all want to chip in. So just tell us what the payroll is and we're going to help you fund this upcoming payroll.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and that was the beginning of a lot of pivoting. It was at those moments where you might just feel like the whole world is on you. And as people come in and it opened up this mental space, it opened up your creativity to say, okay, we can actually still pay people this week. We can help. And then we really, really targeted everybody who couldn't get unemployment and reach out to them and say, please don't be shy. We are here. We have the provision. We got started on GoFundMe. Like, we want to help you. There's no staff that should ever go hungry or that is getting kicked out of their apartment. Please speak out. And that was actually a really, really sweet time of how much we've been able to help our staff, but also seeing the generosity of our staff. Like, I got to see people that really said, I'm good. Like, I got my unemployment. Please make sure you took care of the other people on our payroll. And I just love that idea of generosity begetting generosity and that it's contagious. Long story short, because of all of these things that's kind of happened throughout, there was one particular, really just an acquaintance that was very generous with her creativity and her mental space. And she asked, is there any way I can help you guys start a fundraiser that would ask people to donate financially for you to be hired to feed medical workers all around New York City? It was still a pretty new idea at that time. And I was like, absolutely. Like, if you're willing to spend the time and help us, like, we would of course be extremely passionate about doing this. Personally, my sister-in-law, who's also a dear, dear friend of mine, it's a nurse in Chicago when her hospital was affected very, very significantly. There was a huge outbreak within the nurse population. She herself actually most likely ended up getting it. She had all the symptoms that was pretty severe. And I just so want to help in a small way of the incredible, heroic medical workers in our city. I can't believe how successful it had become. We had like a small $15,000 goal saying, you know, if we raised above 6,000, we'll go ahead and do this. And it happened almost like overnight. And it was a lot of small donation and a lot of organic shares. Like the share on our GoFundMe just blew my mind. And what was really touching too, as you can imagine, being an owner on something like this, obviously, you know, I've never gotten paid for this. I have spent gazillion hours and a lot of tears over the last 5 years starting this. We don't know when New York City was gonna ever be open at that point, and we have relied a lot on Broadway community and the audience, and we know that's not coming back anytime soon. So you can imagine being in my seat, it is really hard to feel like it makes sense to keep going. But it was a lot of the messages on that page of people just saying, love you guys, want to help, can't wait for you to come back, love that you're always wanting to serve the city, etc., etc. That really kept me going. Since then, we've raised over $110,000 and we have fed over 7,000 medical workers, and we're still going.
That's incredible. 7,000 medical workers. That's incredible. And April, it sounds to me like part of what you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like what you said is crisis creates the opportunity to think creatively as a leader, but you also have to be in a posture of openness to whatever then comes your way to help solve the problem, because it sounds like things came to you and you had to have an open hand and a willingness to fold it in to however you were going to try and solve this. So talk to me about that attitude of, and that takes humility as a leader, because you'd like to come up with the plan out of your own head and your own heart, but it sounds like you had to just receive opportunities that came to you and then fold those into your leadership. Is that right?
Yeah, it's funny you said that. That was very observant. I didn't even think of it that way, because of course that's wonderful if somebody wants to help. But she actually later on told me, as mentioned, she's just an acquaintance of my husband. And I have never met this woman, but now we feel like BFFs because we talk all the time. But she actually later on told me, I think we were the third restaurant that she reached out to. And the first two had said that they were okay or that they weren't ready to do something like this. So I was grateful that we happened to she kept saying like, thank you so much for being open to me helping. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Well, thank you. Like I never would have thought somebody would thank me for being open to getting help. But then she later on told me that we're the third place that they had asked. So that is one way for sure. I think it's because of the way we're structured. We have always relied on our community. It is legitimately a not-for-profit social enterprise. You know, we've had people that I pay, a project manager, and after 8 months, he said, hey, I see what you guys are doing. I'm done being paid by you. I just want to volunteer for the rest of my end up being 2 years of his time with us. We've had a lot of people that volunteer as our social media manager. So I think because of the way we're structured, we want this to be a community effort. We need people to want to step in, because I can only do so much as one person. And we set this up so that we can have this, again, max impact to be a small gift to society.
Well, a lot of people that connect with us in the VoxCon community, they work in similar nonprofit sectors, be it running a nonprofit organization that's providing some kind of human care, or they work in the church. And I would like to think that we would be, those people who are in that sector, we would be in the right posture and position to be open to the resourcing of the community. But that is often not the case, because it just takes a whole lot of humility to say, I'm not going to come up with the plan all on my own. I'm going to have open hands and some humility that says, God is going to provide something to me that I'm going to then get to be creative with. You have to kind of get over yourself to get to that place, I think.
That's an interesting thought. You know, I think it actually leads back to some of the conversations I often have around generosity. People often ask me, why did I choose maybe this lifestyle of, we really do strive to live in a way that is radically generous in every way as possible, capping our own income, starting a nonprofit restaurant on the side, or even having roommates, 5 years into our marriage where they're just various ways to kind of live. And of course, spending a lot of time overseas. And I share all that not to say like how awesome we are and how giving we are, but I think it ties into the point you're trying to make is I could never really fully explain why it makes so much sense for us to live that way until more recently, maybe a year ago, when I really went to a generous giving conference and somebody had really tied in the connection of gratitude and generosity and how it becomes a really natural response. And that's something that I realized had been like so drilled into my head ever since I was a kid, and especially as an immigrant family. I share that bits and pieces in the video. I think because I knew the opportunities that I've had and how, maybe I said it then, like when my mom was 11, she was already working full time. When she was 7 or 8, she was literally like working part-time and then going back to mainland China by herself from Hong Kong with like bags and sugar and rice and different things she has to bring back for her siblings back home. And I could have been born like 25 years prior, and I could have the same quote unquote brains or mental capacity or whatever, and my life would have been drastically different. So I think that allows me to like genuinely feel both a lot of humility, but also be like a lot of gratitude. Like I just know nothing that I have is like from me. Like it's easy for me to see what is it that I have hasn't come from God or an opportunity someone has given me. Then that makes it a bit easier to feel like, okay, God, how are you going to provide? Who can you send my way? And I'm actually more in the camp of constantly praying for wisdom, where sometimes I feel like I'm just a little child, and thank you, God, for allowing me to steward, my career. And this restaurant, thank you for letting me steward your restaurant, but I need you to show up and show off big time right now for me to keep going.
It's an interesting idea to consider, to ponder as leaders. What would our leadership look like? And how would our leadership change if more of what we did in our work was motivated by gratitude? Would the work that we do be seen, at the very least in our own eyes, as more of a gift that we give to the world? And would what we then offer to those who are around us and those who are receiving some service from us, would the capacity increase if we saw as the motivation, or just tapped into the reality that our motivation is and should be the fact that we have been richly blessed? How would our leadership change? I think I don't have an answer for that. I think you and yourself are an answer for that, but I think it's a good question for creatively minded leaders to wrestle with. How could my leadership shift and change and expand if it's motivated by what I already have been given rather than what I'd like to receive, right?
Yeah, I think that's why I've always really resonated with the idea that it's like called justice. And Dr. Keller has said many times, like, it's just called justice because it's not charity. I really see that it's the fair thing to do, and it's the just thing to do, like I always say, because it's not on, it's especially in this season, like it's not on any of us which country we were born in, whether or not, impacted for me was my first trip, whether or not we were born HIV positive, or with various challenging situation, the color of our skin, the privilege that we have, whether or not you're aware of it or not, the gender, like there's just so many things that are out of our control. So then it really just become like, of course we share. It doesn't make any sense not to. One simple analogy that I've always gone back to is imagine you work for FedEx and you have all these packages in your house, and somebody goes into your apartment and they're like, what are you doing? Like, the packages, it's meant for you to go and take to whoever is addressed to. Like, that is not your job as the messenger. And I've just always seen that as my role, whether it be as a professional woman, as a leader, as a child of God. Like, that's just my job, to like go and pass those packages along, to figure out whose address is it really. And it's not really packages that's for me to go and share because they're mine. I'm just being nice to share with you, if that makes sense.
It does. April, we have a question that's come in from the VoxCon community. This is Jonathan Graham, and he has a question for you.
Hi, April. This is Jonathan Graham from Master Media International. As you juggle work, family, mission, how do you adjust to the different needs that are coming your way during a crisis, including self-care and emotional wellness?
It's a question that I get very often. The idea of much is given, much is demanded. I think we always think of course, resources, right? Or privilege and things like that. I don't know how helpful this is, but one thing that hit me a few years ago was energy. I think God has naturally blessed me to be somebody who has a lot of energy, so that allows me to keep going to different things. And he also, another thing, much is given, much is demanded, is he's also made me someone who has a lot of deep, genuine passions. So those two combined, like, I really, really, really care about the things I'm involved in. And it's never really just like, oh, I sit on the board and I should go do this. Like, I look forward to my board meetings and my board retreats, and I like want to think about them. I want to talk about them. So in a way, it just becomes really life-giving for me to be involved in these things. I actually think it would be more exhausting if I only have my day job and none of the other things. Like, I wouldn't know what would get me excited to go and do the same job for 15 years. Like, what would I do with my platform or my money that would give me, the joy that I have gotten to receive? So sometimes it is counterintuitive, the time that you get. But of course, I would say not to be legalistic about it. It's one thing that I've learned and matured. I think earlier in my life, when I was in my late 20s, I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't spend money on this, X, Y, and Z. And now I've realized, like, my sanity is important. And even if I have to spend money on an assistant, that's just saved me so much time that it's definitely worth it. And I really, really prioritize, whether it be, time. For me, it's prayer time and reading the Bible, or watching documentaries that really, really rejuvenate me, like remind me of the work that I do. Like, a lot of things that we now, of course, we talk about, like Just Mercy and 13th and things like that. It's really hard to watch, but it reminds me of a lot of, like, why we do what we do. And I think going back to those missions for yourself is really important.
Yeah. You touch on something that I think is a really important thing for people to realize when they talk about self-care, is that the notion of rest is really critical. But rest isn't always doing nothing, but it can be doing something that empowers you to do the work that takes more energy, right? And so, and you've been blessed to find things that are passion projects for you, that even though I'm sure they make great demands on you, yet in the doing of them, it pours energy into you that allows you to do all the other things you have to do. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
No, absolutely. I always feel like it's so ironic. It almost seems like, but I actually, even when I was a kid, my dad would teach me, don't be afraid to give away your money, because, you'll be surprised, like, sometimes how it comes back to you, all of that. Maybe it's not theologically sound, but I think his point is that it's not always just like zero-sum game. And I started really thinking about that with my time. And I do find that if I do spend the time in prayer, or if I do spend the time reminding myself the core, like, you know, sometimes when I get really down, going and watching Girls Rising, or like going to read a blog from one of the organizations that I support. Oh wait, oh my gosh, of course I want to keep going. Of course it's worth the pain or the sacrifice. Yeah. And there is, like, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It's been, at one point it was really, really hard building it, and it required a lot of sacrifice that could be overwhelming. And now back again, we're at a similar place, but that's what helps me keep going, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and again, just, you know, on the topic of creativity, you know, as you well know from the PS endeavors that you have, you know, creativity involves sacrifice. It involves pain. You know, producing anything of value comes at a cost. But when that creative expenditure is coupled with passion that fuels you, that's when, like, incredible things happen. And so it's important for those who are watching and listening, who are pouring their lives into something that they're passionate about, is to find some other outlets that pour into you, so that you can keep going, so that you can keep pouring out into this thing that you love. That's yeah. Because creativity comes at a cost. Creative leadership comes at a cost, and you can't just keep pouring out. You need to be driven by a passion and then have a source filling you up as well.
I always found this interesting, that passion, at its Latin root, it's patit, which actually means suffering and enduring. Yeah. Right? I always say that because for a while I was like, gosh, I suffered so much to start PS Kitchen. We were told it was going to take a few months. We were going to tell it was going to cost a certain amount, and both of those were quadruple by the time we finished. And imagine, I mean, I was literally 30 years old when I signed this 15-year lease, and it was so scary to be facing this empty restaurant and cleaning my own savings and have no restaurant in sight. But those are the moments where I just like, okay, passion, it's suffering in a way, and going back to, like, what are we doing all of this for? Once we really have that core of, like, right, I'm doing it because I feel passionate about job creation. I'm doing it because one day when I pass, I'm not going to, like, wish I had salvaged my savings, you know? Like, I think I would be glad that I took a leap of faith. And those are kind of the things I kind of need to hang on to.
April, what are some things that you've tried in the past that maybe haven't panned out, that haven't worked, that haven't had the success that PS Kitchen has had?
Well, I would say kind of what I just shared was a big one. I would not call that successful at all. It seems like it's successful, which it is now that you look at us. But I would say from 2015 to 17, or even 2018, like, it felt like a complete failure, and it really was. We had really cleaned ourselves out financially. I really, really struggled with whether or not I made the right decision. We had paid our architect, our landlord, the Department of Building, like, so much money. And I literally have a black hole in Times Square. Like, nothing. And then even after we finally opened, the first year we lost a lot of money every single month, and we just had to keep funding it to keep it open. And I always feel very open about sharing that, because it's important for people to know, like, it's a struggle, and just because you feel like you're doing a good thing, or you feel like God called you to something, it definitely doesn't make it easy. And sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith.
What resources did you draw from during that time to know not to give up, to know to keep going? Because I'm sure that's a question I'm sure it's a question you ask. Should I just stop? Is the struggle I'm experiencing right now as a leader just a giant stop sign from God? Or is it something He wants me to pass through? That's a terribly difficult question to answer. How did you navigate the question of, should I keep going?
Wow. It's such a good question, especially today. At that time, I had prayed a lot, of course, before actually starting it. And I had a few crazy stories that happened that eventually led me to decide, like, okay, I am going to take this leap of faith. And I think it was because of a lot of the prayers that went into it, or also because of people that are there that have watched the process. Later on, a year later, 2 years later, they're there to remind me, like, you're not crazy for getting to this place. You know, you really had this vision, and you also felt like you have prayed, and, you know, God has led you down this path, which then makes it easier, still not easy, to kind of hang on to that path, right? And actually right now I'm at the same place, which is why it's funny and ironic for you to ask me this question today, as someone who has a restaurant in Times Square. Again, no Broadway. A lot of the offices are now closed for a indefinite amount of time. What is wise for me to do? Do I keep going? Is my impact still there if I can't even open my doors, or open in such a limited, you know, capacity? It's pretty crazy that so a few weeks ago, I'm going to tell a little story now of what, at least how currently I'm processing all this. About 2-3 weeks ago, I started praying very, very expectantly and persistently for God to literally speak to me, and for him to please guide me. Not necessarily like an audible voice or anything, but just that I would know within every fiber of my body, like, if I should keep going. I told him, you know, in my prayer journal, that I know that I don't always deserve a sign from God, but I literally need one now, God. So if you would be generous with your voice. On May 10th, Mother's Day, I was sharing this with my husband, and he's definitely have a very different kind of like view of a lot of this than me. I have like a bit more of like a childlike faith, and like, okay, I pray expectantly, I want to see what God does. And he's probably more like theologically sound, like, you know, like history of Christianity, anti-right kind of person. And he just kind of like playfully throughout, well, you know what I believe is a sign from God? If somebody comes in and decide to pay our rent for a year, that would be completely insane. I'm like, okay, like, sure, but who's gonna do that? I'm talking about 2-story high, prime real estate, Times Square, New York City. Like, who's gonna come and pay our rent? I didn't even send out any email or ask or look into foundation, but I prayed. And the good thing about having a prayer journal, I think, is that you can never dispute what you had prayed and whether or not you just imagine this in your head. So May 10th, I put in this thing, and I specifically asked God, like, would you please, please give me a sign and send someone to come pay our rent? Not just financially providing, but also really to speak to Graham so that he would know you're in it. Because that's really important as you are doing something so hard, to have your partner see it the way you do. But also for me, myself, to know that, God, you really are in it, and that it's something I can hang on to for the next 10 years of my lease. Literally 48 hours later, I got a completely unsolicited email from an acquaintance who said nothing, gave me no context, didn't even call me to say he was going to make this intro, and just said, hey, intro, April, meet Todd, Todd, meet April. I think he wants to talk to you about PS Kitchen. And I end up getting on a call with this person who told me that he's already seen my videos on generous giving, and that I didn't really need to pitch him the idea. He loves what we're doing for PS Kitchen. And B, he's working for a wealthy man. I don't even know his name or the state that he is in, but he works for a wealthy man who has a daughter in New York, and they want to allocate $1 million to organizations in New York City, specifically around COVID. And he said, what are your needs? It's just as simple as that. What are your needs? And at that point, we were doing a lot of, medical workers donations. So I said, okay, well, you can help us fund medical workers meals. We can keep going. There's a lot of needs. I was getting like 7 emails a day from nurses and doctors and, medical assistants, etc. 2, they had said something about food insecurity in this long email chain. So I was like, honestly, I feel so passionate about those that don't have a home right now, don't have shelters to be shelter in place. I would love for PS to be able to be a vehicle to then go and feed, the Bowery Mission and other shelters like that. And I have already spoken to the Bowery at that point because I felt passionate about it, but we just didn't have the capacity to do that and the medical workers yet. So I have all the information with me on where they need this sent. And 3, just to kind of like throw it out there to see what happens. I kind of said, well, if you like, we can definitely use the help on rent. As you can imagine where I'm going with this. After all these things I just said, he actually responded, oh, rent. That's right up our alley. Like, never have I ever heard someone say that. I mean, Matt, you probably done fundraising. Like, no one ever cares about operating budget, especially something so boring and non-sexy as rent. Yep. And he got excited about rent. He asked me how much our rent was. And he said, yeah, that's like right up our alley. I'd love to talk to him about it. Tell me what numbers of months you need, what your rent number is. And then he just said, like, we love the idea of putting wind behind ministry and good organizations' backs. And that was a conversation that happened 2 days after when I prayed it. And I literally still don't know anything about them other than the fact that they just popped into my life. It's funny you ask this now. Well, 2 things happened afterward. Even as I'm waiting for the end result of this, I feel at peace to share this story, even though it's a little bit vulnerable because maybe it doesn't work out. I don't know whether we'll get a check or not. Literally 2 hours later after what I just shared with you, another friend reached out to me and said, April, this sounds like a super random question, but I was wondering, is there any chance what you're doing with the medical workers can be replicated to do for homeless shelters in New York City? And they've been thinking and praying about this. So within 2 days, they pledged, and I didn't even give them an amount, $30,000 for us to go and feed the Bowery Mission. And we started doing that. And you would see it on our social media and effort for this pledge to go and feed the Bowery for 6 weeks. So just kind of crazy how I really needed to hear from God. And I was at times really discouraged. And I almost asked him to take this cup away from me. And I told him I needed a vows renewal since it's been 5 years, almost exactly, since we signed the lease. But he had been faithful.
So it's safe to say, April, that you would not be doing this, and you could not continue to do this apart from the strength and the answered prayers that your faith provides, right?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Oh, but who even would want to do that? That's just insane. I mean, and that's why sometimes I feel weird saying God has called me to this, because I want to be, it feels weird. Like, I just don't want to be like, oh, I'm so confident, like, this is a mission of mine. But, good friends have said to me, like, and I know myself too, like, it would be insane. Like, I'm not that good of a person. It's cost me so much money and stress and tears. If it's up to me, and if it's not something that's so much bigger than me, I would want to shut this down tomorrow. Yeah. But it's a calling, and I have so many stories like this that I don't even have the time to share right now. But tomorrow, it's when I'm going to find out whether or not we get a check. So maybe we can catch back up again tomorrow.
Well, I will check in with you for sure. And I'll be praying and hoping along with you that God yet again shows his generous hand, that to you and your efforts. You know, April, one of my big takeaways from our conversation is just the level of humility and vulnerability that creative leadership requires. I mean, if your story and your example is instructive to us at all, I think for me, that's just a big takeaway. The willingness to be vulnerable with your spouse, who's also your business partner, vulnerable with your God, vulnerable with the constituents that you serve, humble enough to take whatever opportunities and resources come your way, to then work creatively to continue to do what you've been called to do. I just want to commend you for that, the humility and the vulnerability. That's a great lesson for me as a leader. I hope those who are watching take that away as well.
Thank you. It's very kind.
April, if someone wants to be a partner in what you are doing at PS Kitchen and the other endeavors that you have, and they don't live in New York City, they can't walk over to Times Square and eat at PS Kitchen, is there still a way for them to partner with you and be a part of what you're doing?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. You know, we've always just want to be a vehicle for organizations that we really believe in. We started the restaurant so we can donate to them, so that we can hire their clients and provide jobs. So really giving to a lot of the organizations we support in a way is giving to us. If you would come and look at our social media, PS Kitchen NYC, you'll find a link to donate to our effort to feed the Bowery Mission that's still ongoing. And a few other things is we are still a big proponent specifically at a time like this for criminal justice reform, and I have been a really active mentor, board member for an organization called Defy Ventures. We're always looking for volunteers at various different states for people to go in prison, especially hopefully after this virus has passed that we can go back in, but we're also looking for volunteers outside. A financial gift to any of these organizations you find on our website is really helpful. One cool and fun idea for people to help is the organization called Share Hope you just watched in this video actually has a great product that are these made in Haiti yoga pants that is genuinely really good product, but also 100% of the profit go back to funding breast cancer screening, cervical cancer screening, night classes for the men and women to finish high school, and sign language classes for the deaf workers. That is actually unfortunately not uncommon in a lot of these factories, to be able to learn how to sign properly, to be able to how to read and write, and also get hearing aids and speech lessons and different things like that. So there's a lot of ways for you guys to help.
Great. April, thank you so much. And thank you for taking time for this Vox conversation. And we look forward to following the work that you're doing in all the creative endeavors that you have. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to you for tuning in and watching, and stay tuned for more Vox Conversations coming up. And in the meantime, stay creative, use your voice, be you, thrive in your calling.